Hello. So, welcome everyone to I Spit on Your Podcast, a monthly horror podcast brought to you by the Spinsters of Horror. This is the time once a month where Jess puts down her bloody knitting needles and I step away from the TV to discuss horror movies and sometimes other horror mediums with thoughtful analysis, research, and passion.
So I'm Jess.
And I'm Kelly.
And we flew in on our broomsticks onto the horror scene of July of 2018. We are celebrating our 3-year anniversary this month. So to assist in filling the void of female voices in podcasting with our show, I Spit on Your Podcast. So as women, we knew that the genre was dominated by men with a heavily masculine perspective. So we felt it was time and important to celebrate and encourage female horror fans while at the same time remaining inclusive to all who love horror. So you can find me behind the scenes editing and crafting and creating all kinds of new ideas for the project. And Kelly can normally be found in her dark basement with a mug of black coffee, heading up our social media. And we are very excited to be here.
Yeah, so join us as we go deep into the woods to explore Robert Eggers' The Witch from 2015. This New England folktale took witches, Satanists, and horror fans by storm, and for good reason. Its rich storytelling, authenticity, portrayals of historical witchcraft, puritanical idolatry, and the strong feminist undertones made this one of our absolute favorite horror movies. We will discuss the themes of Black Phillip as a symbol of Satan, satanic witchcraft and its empowering force, portrayals of womanhood, motherhood, even anti-motherhood. The witch, our sinister rebel, is one of the oldest fighters against paternal domination with an important relationship to Satan. She will reign and hex the patriarchy. So pick your poison and listen on if you dare.
All right.
Again, welcome everyone.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, we could be here all night talking about the movie and these themes, but we've got like 40 minutes. So let's get into this. First off, we're going to start talking about Black Phillip, everybody's favorite black goat. And we'll start a little bit of the history of goats in satanic imagery and stuff like that. So, it's believed that early Christians were seeking out to demonize pre-existing pagan traditions, and they drew comparisons between the devil and the Greek god Pan, who happened to resemble a goat. And goats get a bad rap in the Bible itself, don't they, Jess?
They sure do. And this is always something that has been very interesting to me as well, because I'd always wonder, why the image of the goat? Why is the goat always associated with Satan? Why are we supposed to fear this really adorable, I find goats adorable creatures. And I think they're so strong-headed. And now I've doing some more of this research about this, I realized that. So it goes back to two different elements in Christianity and also in Judaism. So in biblical references, in one of Jesus's teachings, he mentions in Matthew 25:31 to 46, I don't know the proper terminology anymore for that stuff. That's my old Christian background. That what the kingdom of heaven is going to be like. And so that he used the terms of the goats would be placed on the left side of the Son of Man, and while the sheep will be placed on his right. And so he was using this goat metaphor to represent those who neglect the needs of his people. So we often refer back to Christ or Jesus Christ as a shepherd. He's always seen as shepherding his people and separating those from the flock who would be the bad kids, and they would, call them out so they don't outnumber the sheep. You would also want to do this in goat farming. So there's actually a continental thing where it's goat herders would try and keep their goats away from the sheep so they wouldn't have too many baby goats over the supply of milk. But anyway, it became like this separation, this idea of herding people. And if you would keep, the sheep are the followers and they follow, they trust in, and of course my cat's coming. They would trust they trust in God. They're willingly to follow. Whereas goats have a reputation of self-reliance and stubbornness.
Yes.
They lean upon themselves. They don't need the support of God to get them through their daily lives. Whereas the shepherd's role is important for the sheep. The sheep need the shepherd. The goats don't need the shepherd. So what ends up happening is that a lot of interpretation around this parable was that, oh, the goats are the non-believers. They're, the people who worship Satan and who are going down a path of destruction because they're not waiting for the arrival where the sheep they are. And so it's like separating, so of course people, they hear these things in the Bible, like, well, the Bible says it, goats are bad. Jesus separated them all up from the sheep, and we need to, so they all clearly just started referencing more to a satanic imagery. Another idea that came from the Bible was, and it's not even from the Bible, it's from Judaism, was Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, which is a Jewish holiday. And back in those times, they used to use 2 goats would be used to represent the sins of the community. So a high priest would come, fill the goat with all the sins of the community, and then send them out to the desert, which is thus the term scapegoating, because the goat is supposed to represent all the evil of the community going out, and then they're able to, be free of whatever evil that came up in the community. And so it's interesting because later on in the Bible, we hear about how like Jesus meets the devil in the desert, because that's where all the evil has been driven out, with all these goats going out there with all of the people's sins.
Yeah, so essentially the goat kind of stands in for the selfish, cold, and uncaring people who defied God's words.
Yes.
Goats. And so goats are obviously a very familiar pop culture reference and kind of an icon, right? In reference to Satan himself. And it's built upon just little bit of information, of layers and layers of influence. And even just recently, Jess and I watched the entire Fear Street trilogy, but in 1666, the spoiler, I guess. No, it's not a spoiler. At the end of the 3rd movie, we just see the inside of the Goods house. Okay. This massive mansion that they have acquired this entire fortune over killing people from Shadyside. But the entire mansion, almost to like, it's a joke, filled with goats and rams everywhere, stuffed, full bodies, heads, horns, like they're everywhere. So obviously when people think of goats, they think of the devil and evil things. I'm gonna do quotations, folks. So what does that mean for Black Phillip in using the image of the goat and the witch? So Akers himself even said that goat mythology and all of that with regards to witches is more of like a continental, like medieval European thing. Even going back to, there's this professor of early modern history named Malcolm Gaskill. So he had also said, like, there's no real straight answer of why we're using, goats in this way. But he had said that, yes, like I said, they had played a prominent role in European witch imagery, but the Puritans over in New England, that's a little bit different. But European engravings and paintings depicted the witch's Sabbath. Not a witch here. Sabbath. Yeah. But that's where these meetings were, where witches were supposed to pay homage to Satan. And then the devil in these paintings and this imagery and this artwork was depicted as a goat or a goat-like man. So Eggers used that kind of like old medieval kind of imagery in his film. I mean, the goat is iconic, so I get that.
It's like often like relating it back often into the image of malevolent spirits. Oh my goodness, I can't say that word. Malevolent spirits, right? Yeah. Which is often the case, like you said, relating the goat to the devil, to the horns, the weird eyes, the very, apparently very predatory sexual potency is around with the images of the goat, and lots of energy. Yes, I've seen goats. They have a lot of energy. They are stubborn. They are gonna, bash heads with anything of what they want. So of course, especially for goat imagery, and especially in a lot of European countries that are, heavily influenced by religion and stuff like that, they're going to see the images of this goat as, evil, and connecting them to evil, because that's independence, and you don't want that, right? You do not want that in any kind of religious establishment. You're like, heavily Catholic religious establishment, like, no, we don't want you to think for yourselves, because you are sheep. You are sheep, and you are to follow the shepherd, who is Christ and the church and all of these things.
Yeah. We even have Thomason say, the adversary comes in the shape of a he-goat and whispers, he is Lucifer. From the subtitles on The Witch, you learn a lot.
You learn a lot when you watch the subtitles in that film.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say, kind of jumping off what Jess was saying with regards to our sexual potency and the energy, there's a lot of sexuality that we'll talk about this evening because it's really important and prevalent throughout satanic witchcraft, emerging womanhood, motherhood, witches, just everything. So we'll talk about that. So Black Phillip, what does he necessarily represent? He represents a variety of different really interesting things. The horns of a goat, the horns of Black Phillip represent fertility, our crescent moon, menstruation, and essentially the feminine. Black Phillip in the movie is also Satan. So he's essentially like this satanic subversion of patriarchy and Christianity. And Per Faxneld, who wrote our tome here of satanic feminism, had said, the horns of the devil not only signify his power, but his associations with death and the underworld in uncontrolled, destructive sexuality.
And that's what makes the scene, and we'll go into spoilers in this episode about the witch, but the very final scene between Thomasin and Satan or Black Phillip is very reminiscent of Eve in the garden, right? When Eve is being asked by the serpent, do you want knowledge? Because God has lied to you. God is telling you that you're going to die if you obtain this knowledge, but that is not true. I will give you knowledge, and you will see that that's not what's going to happen. The very same scene is happening to Thomasin at the end of the film. Wouldst thou love to live deliciously? Yes, of course I do. You want to know knowledge? You want to be liberated from this patriarchy that's essentially going to bound you to a fence to take care of children, because that's what you're looking for. That's what you're asking for. If you want to not live this way, or not want to know knowledge, or not understand, how the world works.
Absolutely. And there's even this subversive messaging in the witch itself. So you have William, the father, our patriarch, or kind of weak patriarch, uses the horns to attempt to control Black Phillip, who is, quote, misbehaving. He's being a goat. He's doing his own goat thing. But then later on, guess what Black Phillip uses to kill William?
Yeah.
His fucking horns. Sorry, I did figure out that it's okay to swear. But killing our patriarch, and in essence, if we're killing that person off, and we'll talk a bit later on why that's also super important to kill William, it's opening up a world of freedom, again, sexuality and independence. As we know, and we've talked about in previous episodes of our own podcast, and what we learned through the witch is that Satan does have a connection to sensuality and pleasure.
And that was so interesting watching this film for the millionth time around, and going in with the research that I had done about, goats and the relation to satanic imagery and why that would be, and why it's a continental thing. So I was curious, Edgar said it was a very continental folklore, connecting the goat to the imagery of Satan, because typically, and the witch as well, because typically over in North America, we're more relations to the witch is more like bats and cats and crows, right? Often see the goat. But I think that's really interesting, learning more about this biblical reference and this history to why goats would be seen as satanic, or why they would be given a bad name. And then understanding that back in the day, it was not a good thing to be a goat herder. If you were a goat herder, you were considered a joke, because goats were very self-reliant and they're destructive, and shepherds have to have complete control over their flock, and you always have to remain vigilant, or they're going to hurt the other animals, and they will escape enclosures and they will destroy the landscape. Goats will do whatever the fuck they want. And so in England, to be a goat herder was not something you want to do, but yet often, especially in early America, you couldn't afford cows, you couldn't afford sheep. The goat was the most affordable animal to have on your farm, and you would have goat milk. So it was so interesting watching Will's relationship as a farmer, but also being a goat herder and dealing with a strong black goat who's being like, no, you're not going to push me around. I'm in charge around this homestead, and you're not, clearly, because you're struggling with your own masculinity, because you spend all your time just chopping wood all the time. Every time something comes up that you have to deal with, right? And
as I secretly invade your family from the children and up.
Right. And like you said, that final scene between William and Black Phillip, I remember thinking father versus father, right? You have, Satan, represented the goat, and then you have will as, the father figure of home. And like, at the end of the day, he was just like, you put so much faith into a God that wasn't answering your prayers, because, and then all and Satan too, you also turned your back on that God because you had your own pride and didn't believe in what everyone else was telling you how to worship.
Yeah.
Now look at where you are.
Dead.
Yes.
Exactly. Could we move on to witchcraft?
Definitely, yeah. So often, like Kelly was saying earlier, often the goat is related to witchcraft because we've seen a lot of early paintings and portraits, particularly the Witch's Sabbath, but done by Goya. Every time you see an image of a witch back in medieval times, there was a goat somehow involved. And we often people like to relate witchcraft to, Satan or satanic witchcraft, or there's some form of a relationship. And often that also comes into a sense of empowerment for women. I know as a witch myself, I find a sense of empowerment in my connection as a witch. And even all for the last 2 years and all we've been doing this podcast, kind of seeing the imagery of Satan in my work and my own beliefs. And it always goes back to, and I talk about her often in everything I've ever done or written, and I go back and talking to Lilith. So when it comes to satanic witchcraft and it comes to empowerment, Lilith is a feminist icon, and she has this connection to Satan that is as close as a witch would want to be, right? At the same time, while Lilith turned around and she spurned the male chauvinist by the name of Adam, she decided to become the wife of Satan, or Samuel, as we are told in Jewish folklore. And one of the reasons why she had done that is because she believed that she had a female sympathizer. She had someone who was enlightened to female equality, someone who wanted to see her rise and see her successful and see her powerful, and at the end of the day, the Lilith folklore, it links the witch image to Satan because, Lilith being kind of like the mother of witches, just as Eve has also linked to Satan as a liberator. Christianity created the concept of good and evil. So then what it ended up doing was placing women in that role with Satan, because, if women have any kind of relationship with Satan, if they want any kind of power, if they want any kind of freedom, it's considered bad. And who else is bad in, the eyes of a Christian? Satan.
Mm-hmm. And women that are overtly passionate, unpredictable, emotional, or hysterical, they historically, women were carnal, lusty beasts, right? And so they were easily vulnerable and easily recruited into Satan's cult, right? So the archetype of the witch, as I think is pretty commonplace, has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years and stems generally from like popular culture and historical references in our European witches, that medieval imagery. But essentially, our witch is a strong, free-thinking woman. And of course, we're going to use that term witch very negatively against those types of women. And those witchcraft accusations way back when, really, weren't they just paranoid, misogynistic code for our skilled women of abilities, healing, midwifery, agricultural knowledge, social skills, financial skills? Jess has written about the guilds of women way back when. And again, coming back to sexual independence. So our witch essentially stands for a woman that's not subservient to the patriarchy. She is a political rebel. She's almost the original feminist, if you think about it.
And I always find interesting how often people want to take the image of the witch and relate it to Satan, but relate it in the way that is dominating, which is not the case. Like, I don't see that in any way, shape, or form. Like, often the relationship between Satan and the witch is that of a partnership. And I see it often and this is what I enjoy so much about this film, is that we kind of see that beginning of that partnership. I know like some people like to turn around and be like, oh no, Thomason's just signing off from one male figure to another male figure. And that's like, well, no, if you don't understand the nature between witches and Satanism and satanic feminism and all these things, that's not the case. Yeah. Witches go into this relationship with Satan, even in any way, shape, or form, as a means of partnership, as a means of equality, as a means of supporting one another, and not as she's not trading in one master for another. Because
Absolutely
honestly, you
not.
cannot control a witch. You cannot a witch
They
has
cannot be controlled
they
or
cannot be
dominated.
controlled. The only master of a witch is herself. She's her own master.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you bring up that partnership is like a perfect word to use for this. And folks, if you kind of like what you hear tonight and you kind of like what we're into and whatnot, we have an entire episode on satanic feminism. Okay, we covered 4 different movies, not just The Witch, but an entire hour and a half episode on satanic feminism, which is kind of where we're going to a little bit head into and touch on now, because yes, that partnership, that counter reading of the fall of humankind, the fall of man, again in quotes, of Eve and the quote serpent, later on being shown as it was the devil manipulating and gave her freedom and knowledge, which apparently to Christians that's a bad thing to have. So it's essentially it's about embracing your outsider status, because that's not a bad thing. It's great to be a goat, not a sheep, right?
Yep.
And use that outsider status, that empowerment, switching around that oppression and being independent to dismantle oppressive modes of conduct, right? And so again, our witch is this subversion of the Christian norm. And hello, covens are all run by women. Right? Just as witches is she is her own master. And then if you are not a solitary witch, women all around you in a coven, right?
And what's interesting is that you get the idea of the witch herself as an image, as a personification. It embodies independence, it embodies perversion, rebellion, which, like Kelly was saying, is often othered and demonized. And this is why the patriarchy likes to take these women and exhibit them as monstrous. And this is why I really like how we get in the film both elements. We get the beautiful young witch in Thomasin with Maiden, which we'll talk later on. And we also get the ugly witch, the haggard, old crone, because there is a monstrous side to women as well. We're never walk away from that either. But that's another way in which the church and men have tried to oppress women and oppress the witch by saying, well, no, you're ugly and scrawny, or you're going to become a crone. And, and it's because of that relationship that you had with Satan that turned you that way. You're embracing of evil, and you're like, embracing my liberation, embracing, control over my own body makes me a monstrous person. I don't understand this concept.
I don't get it either. And interestingly enough, yes, bringing it back to the witch, Thomasin is never harmed by the witch, Black Phillip, or Satan himself, right? Yet she is offered, like Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Offered freedom, independence, and a life of her own, right? And she's unbound by the bondage of religion, puritanism, patriarchal rule. And that's what Black Phillip, aka Satan, offers her. And that's amazing. And talking about sexuality, again, because it's a really huge thing, Thomasin's sexuality was previously owned by God and her family, essentially, her father predominantly. And now it's owned by her. She absolutely consented towards a satanic union. And in this union, she's found, we think, definitely, unequivocally, empowerment in sexuality and the freedom of choosing sexuality over having her father be in absolute control of her own body. She's given, or at least offered and shown, bodily autonomy. And isn't that what we all want?
Well, especially when she finds out that she's going to be sold, like that her mother has decided that Thomasin has now reached the age of sexual maturity. Yep. And to be sold off to another family, they say in the way like, oh, well, she's going to go and work for the other family, and she's going to, and then they'll get money for that because, she's a woman. So it's easy to just trade her off for some money to keep us starving. But then we don't know what life that Thomas is going to end up in. If she's going to end up in another family, she's going to lose her bodily autonomy there, because she'll probably be decided that, oh, you're going to marry the young son, or you're going to marry the old farmer who lost his wife a couple winters ago, and you're still of young age, and you're still of breeding stock. It's horrible to say she's a breeding age, prime breeding age.
Right.
She is
17.
Exactly. She is ready to become a wife. She's ready. She's apparently ready to become a mother, even though Thomas is like, I'm not ready for any of that. You can tell from the very get-go. She is a young, spirited woman. She is kind of like the goat in her family. She is spirited. She has independence. You can see in the way she talks with her father. And I know we're jumping ahead about Thomason, but I wanted to say, like, she already embodies within her the essence of a witch. That desire and need to be free and to be liberated and to have knowledge. And that's what makes her a welcome partner to a relationship with Satan and in a relationship with the other witches in the coven, right? And or even just a relationship with herself and her own body.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my mind, Thomason becomes a literal predator of the patriarchy as she joins her all-female coven to live freely.
Literal predator. How does that explain to me literal predator?
Literal predator. Well, she becomes like this embodiment of harming, like because of her. And I think and we see this again, if you put the subtitles on the witch, you can see like early on and one of the first opening shots, you have Thomason praying. She's like, I've already broken all of the commandments in my mind. So she's already this free spirited. So I think she is the one that causes literally all of this to happen. Some might say it's bad. Yes, people die. I'm not advocating for that, but she's the one, her spirit, her witch spirit, the essence of the witch, which we think, and I agree, that is already in her, literally brings in the death of her family so she can rise and become, like, die, essentially her old self die, and then be reborn as the witch.
Yeah. I really like that. You say that in the sense, because I also think too, like, all the deaths that happen are not because of Thomason, and really not because of Black Phillip either. It is because of the like fervent religious belief that both the family members have, and the sense of denial that they just will not listen to each other or listen to any kind of reason common. And, you know, especially Catherine, when she gets into this whole in her head that she's like witch, evil, like it's just so like revenant of like the moment anyone gets anything in their head that's like, no, this is demon othered and it's superstitious, it's supernatural, and we just, you know, instead of like reasoning with it or understanding it or accepting it, let's burn it with fire. And so I'm like, like at the end of the day, I'm like, the deaths of everyone in the family are not because of Thomas or necessarily Black Phillip. It's because of how they just get caught up in the fever pitch of like potential witch among them. The witch
satanic panic is like that. It's like witch panic, satanic panic, right? The
exactly.
Idea. You get that seed germinating and it infects everybody else around them. And yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good point. So we're going to move on to our final thing to talk about, which is one of my favorite things for sure. But our maiden, our mother, and our crone, our witch, our anti-mother. So talking about Thomason, talking about Thomason, who again, yes, is our protagonist, very interesting character. Right. Sorry. I had said, you know, in the very beginning, we see that she has in her mind, she's already kind of this freer spirit. Like you said, Jess, I feel like I learned a lot from focusing on this type of theme for when I watched the movie again. But she prays for mercy, and we know that God gives her nothing. And later on in the movie, you see her, she has to wash her father's clothes, literally undress him. I'm not sure why she has to undress her fully capable father, but she has to do that. Go wash his clothes. We have to take care of the kids. We have to take care of the farm and the animals and this and that. She's essentially a secondary wife mother figure. And so you're right. That's literally what she is brought into and born into. You were just going to replicate the mother's duties and role in life. That's it. Like, here you go. You're born into this, and that's just it. You don't really have any choice per se, unless you want to be exiled.
Yeah, and I always think it's interesting because what ends up happening to Thomason too is that I almost feel like her mother has decided that she is not going to be a good mother, because when Thomason loses Samuel, her mother is like, mother was like instantly like, you are no good. Yeah, you will not be a good mother. You will not be a good wife. Yep. You're better than a servant. And that's how she starts treating Thomason. She starts treating Thomason like she is a servant of the household. And that, you know, to like clean the master's, you know, wardrobe, you know, look after the children. Like, I found that so interesting watching this time around, that, Thomasin does not get treated like the daughter after the moment Samuel leaves. She's treated like a servant. She's pretty much written off. And I really related to Thomasin in this watch around, because I understand that feeling of being kind of like, you know, if you did not follow in line of your mother's wishes, you were essentially outcasted right away and deemed unnecessary and unworthy of a role of a mother, right? Because we see definitely with Catherine that she values being a mother over anything else. So the fact that Thomasin lost a baby, she's like, Thomasin's not going to be a good mother.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting. So you see how Thomasin's struggling with this, and you're talking earlier about her when she's talking about how she in her prayers to God and that she's, you know, she's sinned and stuff like that. But yet she still keeps trying to be good. She still keeps trying to be the right, like the good daughter, the good wife, secondary wife to her father, you know, the good sister, because she's trying to survive. And I thought that was so interesting when we read in one of our newer article that we read about this emerging womanhood with Thomasin, was that she consciously stepped into her stereotype. So I think this is really interesting, this idea of the embodiment of Memsi. So when a woman consciously steps into a role to try and dismantle the patriarchy from within. So you can see that Thomasin is a free spirit, and she's going to constantly, like, she even challenges her father at some point during the film.
For sure. Yeah.
But at the same time, too, she's still trying to adopt the role of a good Puritan wife to try to erode the stereotype from within. But then we end up finding out that that's not going to work. At the end of the day, for her to survive, she has to make a choice. Is it going to either embody the role of being the ideal puritanical wife, or gain power, gain independence, gain status as an opportunity as a witch? Yeah. And we know the role she ends up going at the end of the day, which all the power to her, because I get that. Like, I understand that too. I, as a woman, at times subvert myself to try and fit into society, to try and like erode things from within. But I've also learned in the last couple of years that that's not how things are going to change. I need to just rip off the band-aid and just be who you are, be who I am, and just, you know, like, I will erode things from the outside. It's time to be the ultimate rebel. And then Kelly and I talked about in our Satanic feminism episode, the witch is the ultimate rebel. Thomasin has chosen, instead to be the, you know, the ultimate servant, she's going to servant of God and wife and mother, and how she's going to be the ultimate rebel.
Yeah. Speaking of rebellion, I'm going to talk about sex again.
Oh,
you know,
Kelly's favorite topic.
Again, also on this rewatch, and it's very true.
Yeah.
Kate, so Catherine, the mother to Thomasin, she says to Thomasin at the end of the movie, "You had him," which means she's referring to Thomasin having sex with the devil, which means you are no longer a virgin. And that is a big, big no. Calls her a proud slut. And then insinuates that she flirts with her father and Caleb. Massive taboos. Hello, right there. But also, yes, she is no longer a virgin. She is no longer pure. She has not saved herself for marriage and all of that. So it's almost like this defining moment for Catherine. She's like, oh yeah, no, you're absolutely this bad person. You're absolutely this bad woman. You're absolutely this witch. And that she's like already been convinced at this point. Like, she already had all of those inclinings. She very easily thought Thomasin was a witch, but then she's like, nope, you had sex with Satan. That's it.
Yeah. Like, from the get-go, she was just like suspicious of Thomasin. Like, it's in my eyes, Thomasin had no chance. And I remember talking to you later on about the film being like really interesting, the relationship between Thomasin and her father, in the sense that also she's very much like her father in the sense of her pride and her stubbornness, and how often when we watch in the film, never is Thomasin and her father Will in good graces with Catherine at the same time. It's always one or the other.
Yeah.
So if like Will's in Catherine's good graces, Thomasin's okay. Thomas is in the shit house. If vice versa. And I thought that was so interesting, because it's like that idea of competition and threat, that her own mother views her young daughter as a threat to her and as competition in her own family and her own life. And so what's the best way to eliminate a threat? Either sell it off or call it a witch and get rid of it.
Absolutely. So like, just the idea of Thomasin having the idea of her having sex with Satan is scandalous, right? It's powerfully rebellious for the time. Absolutely. And also, Satan's offering it's dangerous. It is sexual. It's like enticing. It's exciting. It's this promise of community, of sexuality, Thomason at the end is so free she levitates. Okay, folks. Before that, she had nothing. She had no future, and now she be the witch of the woods.
And you watch the elements of like her hair all of a sudden is down completely, right?
I love
the
it.
covering is off, the hair is
it.
completely down. She's disrobed. She is she's nude, and she is embracing nature in the woods, and taking off those constricting garments of what's supposed to keep us all within and keep us contained and keep us subservient. But that's all gone now, right? Because when you are, I guess you would say skyclad, you are exposed to the world, your vulnerabilities are to the world. And what's more stronger than a woman who shows her confidence? What's more scary, terrifying to a man and to the patriarchy? A woman walking around naked and feeling confident. Like, you watch Thomason's walk too. She's confident. She's a little nervous, but all those women dancing around, they're enjoying themselves. They're feeling themselves. They're feeling expressed and relief, and right.
Absolutely.
And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm down going tangent.
Well, the ending, folks, the ending just it gives me chills literally every time. It's so fantastic. So we'll talk about our mother, symbol of motherhood, Catherine. She's also a very interesting woman, I found. So she's the quote standard woman of the time. She reveres God and her husband, William. She's pious, she's faithful, she's subordinate to both. And her puritanical beliefs were that women were born to serve men and God, and so she is just, and I like what you said earlier, Jess, that her as a mother is that defines who she is, but then also her religion is wrapped up in it, but also wrapped up in the motherhood aspect of it. Because if you're not a mother, you're not a good woman. But I love that. She is so steadfast and headstrong about this is who I am. This is my identity. I am a mother. I'm a religious mother. Sorry, we just got a little note there.
What's really interesting too is we're saying that about Catherine, and watching Catherine this time around for this watching is interesting because she was conflicted earlier on. She talks about at one point being so in love with Christ that she would have married him, which made me think about nuns. Because if you're back in those times, if you were not going to be a mother, and devote your life to your husband and your family, the other option was to go be a nun, and to become a bride of Christ and to marry into that. So she is literally, but she decided to turn away from that to marry Will and to have a family. And now look what's happening. It's apparently being torn apart by this evil within. And she quotes a really interesting thing. And once again, I recommend to people who have not seen this film as many times as we have to watch it with the subtitles, because there's so many interesting things that are said. And I've watched this film so many times. She talks about Job's wife. And I remember being who, Job, I know this. I remember this from my early, Catholic days. And Job's wife is known, the story of Job, the book of Job, is all known about undeserved suffering. And so when she is talking about the story of when Job loses all his children, his possessions, his health, and he has this wife, she's nameless throughout this book. And she appears in the story after Job has been so ill and stricken with boils and stuff like that. And she yells at him to curse God and die. Just be just curse God and die. Because what's happening is that there's apparently this battle between God and Satan, trying to convert Job, and and testing Job's faith in God. And everyone hated her for that. And there's been this huge misinterpretation about her, that she was speaking up against God, that she was denouncing that she was a bitter woman. And that's what Catherine is relating herself to, that all of a sudden she's become this bitter woman because she's asking her husband to just curse God and die, just walk away from all this. And it's sad because she's usually condemned as a figure in the Christian virtue, and she's often among the hall of shame of women, which is really unfortunate, because when you start thinking about the story of Job and his wife, she suffered just as much as him, and just as much as Catherine is suffering as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just checking the time. I think we have about 10 minutes before it's the 45-minute mark. Anyways, so I'm just being the time police, just making sure, folks. I also noticed that too, and I don't know that much about Job, so I'm glad that you looked that up. But what I found was really interesting in that whole monologue and that whole scene is that it adds so much despair that her faith is shaken. She's just oh, I don't even know. It's almost like her facade crumbles, her whole identity starts to crumble, because it's very deeply rooted and in who in who she is as a mother. And I think we talked a lot about how important her mother is, that she very easily thinks that Thomasin is a witch. William wants proof, of course. He ends up putting some of the pieces together that are coincidences, but it's a superstitious time. So coincidences aren't a thing. It's superstition. All of this points to you're a witch. So we're just going to go with that, right?
Right. And if you're in a very heavily religious mindset and state, you're going to believe those clues quicker, those superstitious clues, than actually the rational thoughts. And when she's, like I said, when she's already consigned herself to being the bitter wife and being, you know, the uncompassionate woman and stuff like that, like she's already consigned herself to her lack of faith, in the sense of that she is now spoken words that she can never speak again or be unheard. And that she herself is stepping out of a place and being introspective and showing expressions of despair and grief. When really she, you know, at the same time too, they're telling her, you shouldn't be doing that. You know, you should just be like, Will's like, calm woman, calm, like stay calm. And she's just like, we are dying. Things are happening. But, you know, there's also this belief in the witch that they're being poisoned by this, by the rotting of the corn. So it's like, you make her wonder, is like, is this her fervent religious beliefs that are really turning her against her own daughter and her own family? Or is this, you know, this poison that's messing with her mind?
Ergot poisoning?
Ergot poisoning. Thank you. Yes.
I want to bring up lastly about Kate, because I, again, found this really interesting. At the end of the movie, Satan initially appears to Catherine in the images of her dead sons. And because Kate is so wrapped up in her identity as a mother, because that's just literally who she is, that's all that she is, she's easily transfixed by these images. Caleb says to her, again, subtitles, ask her to look at a book that he has, the devil's book, but she's way too distracted because Samuel needs to eat. He needs to be nursed. So she's so distracted by these maternal duties that is so deeply ingrained in her being as a woman of this time that, hey, also Satan kind of moves on. Maybe got two for the price of one, but he ends up just getting one. But we move on to Thomasin next, because she's not bound by all of this. And as we said, she already has the makings and the essence of a witch inside her, or a free spirit, an independent woman.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting this time around too. Like, she's so focused on feeding the baby, you know, she doesn't recognize. And I almost feel like she's like, you know, the whole image of the bird pecking at her breast at the same time too. It's kind of like, well, this is what you want. You will endure this pain to be this mother.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, absolutely. And then our last bit that we're going to talk about this evening, of course, the witch, the crone, our symbol of anti-motherhood. So in medieval history, our historical witch imagery, there's infanticide, devil worship, cannibalism, and free sex and free love, right? That's what we have. And the witch here, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but this monstrous witch threatens to demolish and abolish this whole entire female, quote, female domain, our children, the home, the food, the animals. So I found in showing the witch in The Witch, our witch figure as historically accurate, insofar as like the myths and the rumors and the folklore and everything, was incredible, right? She's everything you should not be. She is this demonic, satanic opposite of the life of a young woman in a young English Protestant or a young Puritan. She breaks the code of womanhood. Absolutely. Almost seeming like an anti-mother figure.
And yeah, and she's a fascinating figure as well. She is powerful. She's uncanny. You know, she lives outside the border of civilization. So she literally lives within the woods, within nature itself. She is surrounded by the power, you know, in the sense of Satan, because Satan is a natural and also a very earthly being, right? And the witch is often very connected to the earth and to nature and being surrounded by that, whereas typically God is like, you know, very heavenly, out of touch, whereas, you know, Satan is, you know, you could wrap him in a hug and be all cool, right?
Yeah.
And but she's also in opposition of accepted values. She challenges conformity. She's a rebellion. She, you know, and back in those days, to not conform as a woman was to be labeled a witch.
Absolutely.
And she knows at the same time too, the witch is, given an ability to know things about people that we don't know about ourselves, or even that we don't even know about ourselves. And what's been interesting about the film is that often the witch, which if she doesn't appear in her, crone hag form, she appears in other forms. And Caleb, she appeared as a young woman and seduces him, right? Because she knew what was in his heart. Same with Will. She appears as the rabbit, as the game that he's trying to capture to feed and provide his family. She appears in these various ways to us in different individuals. She appears in different ways to us as she is privy to a knowledge that we have within ourselves but are not aware of, but she's aware of, because she's broken those norms. She's broken away from all that. She's not constricted. She's allowed herself to have that forbidden knowledge, that women are given when we have bitten into the apple, which is at the end of the day also, seen as a no-no for witches, right? To have information and knowledge that other people don't.
Absolutely. And a very early on scene of the witch. So you have Catherine, our like ideal epitome of a mother and what you should be and dedicate your entire life to your children. Caleb dies. She lays on his dead body in the grave. Okay, folks, if you remember that, if you've seen the movie, lays on his body. She can't let him go because she thought so highly of Caleb out of all of her children. Caleb was the one. And then we have the scene of Samuel's desecration, the baby's death, right? For a ritual. So it's almost like, and this is a quote from one of our resources, the witch regrets motherhood, cleanliness, and youth. She's the anti-mother. She'd rather rub herself with Samuel's blood than give birth to him herself. Grim, but yes, the exact opposite of what you should be.
Well, the idea that the baby's blood gives the witch power and the ability to fly, right? Is that leading to that element, and this building up a case against the witch, right? That this anti-motherhood image against her, right? Because in a way, the witch is a mother herself, but she's a mother of everything. She's a mother of all, right? So, but because she's not the patriarchy's idea of a mother, she is ugly and she is crone, she's evil, she is the anti-mother, but you're like, so they slap these images on witches being like, oh, you guys are baby eaters, you're using babies for your switches. And we're like, at the end of the day, we're like, no, we just don't want babies.
Yeah, exactly.
We just want other things. We want other avenues for us in life. And this is what Thomasin at the end of the day searches for, what she goes for, right? She had to be a mother at a young age. Back in those days, I could see Thomasin, pretty much raising her brother Caleb, and then eventually the twins, and the twins don't even give her the time of day, which, I would love to do a whole episode about the twins. So let's talk about those.
Yeah,
I was like,
totally.
no children. No. But yeah, those are my thoughts around the witch.
I love that. Last couple of things on my end is that, you talked about how, we're showing our witch figure as the crone, as this hag figure of terrifying power. She's monstrous, she's evil, non-human. So bringing this all back, round out this episode. So our satanic influence on women is strong and absolutely powerful. Our witch is primal. She's evil. So the archetype of the satanic witch strikes fear in the hearts of the religious, the superstitious, our patriarchal views. Because what she really is, when you take away all the myth and the magic and all the folklore, is something truly fearsome. She's an independent woman without a need for a man or God. Okay. So Satan as a figure, as a guide to self-reflection, self-actualization. It's not evil. It's not wrong. It's not patriarchal. It's freedom.
And you know what? I'm going to end it there because that's beautiful. Like I cannot say anything upset, but you're right. This relationship with Satan is an idea of equality and independence and freedom for women. Bodily autonomy, 100% for everyone, for all women. So yeah. That's what I'm going to say. That ends our presentation on Robert Eggers' wickedly fantastic film, The Witch. I know we kind of sped through it a lot because we only had a little bit of time, but like Kelly and I could talk hours about this film. So we want to thank everyone for watching. And if you are already following us, you know where to find us. But if you aren't, you can follow us on our website at thespinstersofhorror.com. We're also on Facebook at Spinsters of Horror. And we also have a coven group called Spinsters of Horror Coven.
We're on Twitter at Horror Spinsters. We're on Instagram at Spinsters of Horror. And our podcast is on all podcasting apps. So please check us out. Check out our previous episodes, Satanic Feminism, and then rate and review us. But folks, until then, remember,
the future of fear is female.